How do you decide between JavaScript classes and functional patterns? Imagine building a house. Do you prefer designing with blueprints that define every room and feature, or do you like working with flexible, modular pieces you can combine? Choosing between JavaScript classes and functional patterns is a bit like that. It all depends on what your project needs and how your team likes to work. JavaScript classes, introduced in the S6 version of JavaScript, give you a clear way to create objects with shared properties and methods. Think of classes as blueprints for building multiple similar objects. They help when you want to model real-world things like users, products, or UI components that have internal states and need to manage their own lifecycle. Classes use the keyword class to define these blueprints, and they support features like constructors, inheritance, and methods, making complex object management easier. Functional patterns focus on writing pure functions that do not change data outside their scope. Instead of creating objects with classes, you work with functions that take inputs and return outputs without side effects. This approach uses higher-order functions like map, filter, and reduce to process data. It's especially useful when you want your code to be predictable, easy to test, and simple to maintain. Functional patterns avoid shared mutable state, which reduces bugs and makes your code more reliable. In web development, especially with frameworks like React, the choice often comes down to components. Class components use JavaScript classes to handle state and lifecycle events. They can be more complex and requiring understanding of the this keyword and prototype chains. Functional components, on the other hand, are simpler and more concise. With the introduction of hooks, functional components can now manage state and side effects efficiently, making them the preferred choice for many developers today. From a performance point of view, functional patterns tend to produce fewer bugs related to state mutation. They also make refactoring easier because functions are isolated and predictable. But if your project involves complex objects with many interconnected parts, classes can provide a clearer structure and better encapsulation. Another option to consider is the module pattern, which uses closures to hide private data and expose only what's necessary. This pattern can help organize code without the overhead of classes, especially if you want to avoid the complexities of inheritance or the this keyword. So how do you decide? Think about how complex your data and state management are. Use classes if you need to model complex objects with internal states and lifecycle methods. Opt for functional patterns if your focus is on transforming data, writing predictable code, or avoiding mutable state. Also, consider your team's familiarity with these paradigms. If your team is comfortable with object-oriented programming, classes might be more natural. If they prefer functional programming, then sticking with functions and hooks makes sense. Frameworks and libraries also influence your choice. For example, React now favors functional components with hooks because they are simpler and more flexible. But in other cases, especially when working with object-oriented codebases, classes might fit better. In the end, understanding the strengths of both approaches helps you make the right decision. Knowing when to use classes or functional patterns allows you to write cleaner, more maintainable, and more efficient JavaScript code.